welcome Russell and Adele. So it's a really great honor to have them here today. They are the two of the three curators of this exhibition. The other curator, Ruben Kian, is a curator of contemporary Asian art at the Queensland Art Gallery, and we're very lucky to have our colleagues from the National Gallery of Singapore with us today. So I thought that one of the things that we'd like to do with this talk is to really get the perspectives of the curators and some of the decisions and the reasoning behind the choices that they have made. Maybe to also discuss the process of making an exhibition. This is this is a very complicated exhibition that's being presented here in Indonesia, and I think that it's a great opportunity for our audiences to ask questions of the process of making exhibitions. And of course, we'd like to really learn a little bit more about the life and work of Yayoi Kusama. And so, in the process of making the exhibition, our two guests will have done quite a lot of research about the artist. So we're going to keep it very conversational, and there'll be an opportunity at the end for some questions, and I feel free to maybe make some notes and to come up with some questions that we can ask our guests towards the end of the discussion. So, firstly, I wonder if you could both talk to us about who is Yayoi Kusama. Maybe to talk a little bit about her life and the reasons why she's become the artist who she is and why she's so important to the history of art.
Um, I would just say that I think Kusama is such a special artist, almost like a phenomena of the 20th century and into the 21st. Someone who actually worked a long time in order to achieve the status that she has today, but at the same time, somehow finding complete universal global relevance, which is, I think, quite rare in an age where we're still fighting for equality of representation for women artists. I think she shines as such a special beacon and inspiration for not just women artists, but also younger artists. And she's also said that she doesn't actually want disciples. You know, she wants people to be able to kind of express their own subjectivity. And although she's such a powerful figure at this time, she kind of displaces this idea of this kind of master-disciple hierarchy, which I think is actually very valuable.
So can you explain a little bit more about that? What do you mean by she doesn't conform to this?
I guess it's, you know, people often ask, like, because she's so famous and powerful, you know, what can young people learn from her? I think she tries to allow for people to believe in their own judgments, allow them space. And certainly when you go into her installations and the immersive environments, she allows you to expand your own subjectivity and creativity in that space. Yep.
So you notice on the screen here we have just a rolling slideshow of images from our exhibition in Singapore, as well as the exhibition in Brisbane, just to show you how the exhibition looked as it travelled around, because it's changed a bit. But I mean, the reason we were interested in Kusama is there's a number of reasons. Obviously, she's very popular. She's probably the best-known contemporary artist alive today. And I think it's not just her art that's very well-known, but her as a persona. And she's an artist who's always been very aware of the value of her persona, and someone who's been able to utilize that to promote her work and to promote the ideas around her work, which she sees as very universal ideas of sort of interconnection, of self-obliteration, and like Adele was saying, sort of about this creativity and wanting to share creativity and inspire others to share that as well. So I think that's quite a unique situation and something we thought would be very interesting to unpack. Obviously, she brings a lot of people into the museum. It's sort of a surefire audience. You know, that's pretty proven. You can see it downstairs. But I think we also wanted to understand how she got to this point. You know, so the exhibition really begins in the early 50s with these very small, very intimate works on paper that she was making. So And she connects to so many different art moments and art movements, both in Japan and also in the United States. So she was almost like a proto-global artist in many ways. The fact she moved between the two and was able to utilize both, Japanese art and I guess Western art in a very powerful way. I think she's able to synthesize it and activate it, which talks to a much broader audience than just if she was just sort of Japanese artist or just an American artist. So I think that's also been very important, I think, in how she's been received now as her work is so translatable in so many ways.
I found it quite interesting when she was doing the video for the inauguration of the exhibition in Singapore. She described herself as an avant-garde artist. It's a term you don't actually hear very much in the contemporary world these days. But I found it kind of interesting because it felt that then it meant that her art was still pushing at something, right? She was still, kind of grasping at that kind of gap between art and life and what do we do in it. And I think then it speaks for this potential for art to kind of resist and transcend certain boundaries. And it means that she still has certain kind of standards that she wants to adhere to, which most people kind of don't see in this Instagram age, which is, slightly unfortunate. But there's a seriousness behind the work that she does.
So let's talk about that period before the Instagram age. I think that you talk about the fact that she is someone who is pushing against something. So can you talk a little bit about her early life and how where she was born and how she got to America and the types of things that she was doing in that early period?
Yeah, she was born in 1929 in Matsumoto, which is a kind of rural part of Japan. She came from a very wealthy family. They ran a kind of nursery or, growing and selling vegetables and flowers. So you can see that coming up in her work continually. But her family life was very difficult. Her parents didn't get along, they fought a lot. The mother was from a higher class than the father, so the father actually took on the mother's surname. So that caused a lot of friction within the family, and his response was to have a lot of affairs. So, and her mother actually forced Kusama to spy on her father. So this sort of trauma at a very early age set off a whole lot of anxieties. She also wanted to be an artist from a very early age, and there was a huge resistance because she was supposed to be, a good young girl, Japanese girl, to get married, be a good wife and mother, and she had no interest in that whatsoever. And, her mother would come up behind her and tear her drawings away from her. So this idea of trying to finish and fill these images was almost this anxiety about, having these constantly ripped off her by her mother. So these traumas were very fundamental, I guess, and triggered the way she describes these kind of hallucinatory experiences where she'd sort of feel very disconnected and start to see these visions of sort of screens of dots and nets. She'd hear voices like animals and flowers talking to her. So it was a very discombobulating experience.
But what is fascinating about Kusama is that she turns her trauma into a source of strength. So the fear that occurred when she started seeing these visions, hallucinations, flowers talking to her and being enveloped, and she being completely absorbed into the abyss. She then turns this into material for the artwork, so that she can control her own fears and kind of neurosis. So there's a kind of funny binary or dichotomy that is a push and pull all the time that is kind of really fascinating. So including because she was at a very young age, she had to spy on behalf of her mother on her father, who was a kind of philanderer. So she talks about having seen or caught her father in the act, and therefore developed a kind of a phobia for sex. And subsequently, in the the accumulation series, where she did these soft sculptures, these phallic shapes, which she adhered to objects. the making of these phallic sculptures or structures were also a way for her to kind of keep control of, these fears.
She's also had, I suppose, can you talk about her move from Japan to America, and maybe also what was going on in Japan at that time? I mean, we've spoken about inner her inner self, but what else was going on in Japan, and what would have been the attraction to go to America for a young artist?
Well, it was the war during the Second World War, so she found that very traumatic. I mean, it was very difficult for many people in Japan. So she saw violence, and particularly that perpetrated by men, as a very, despicable thing. So that really drove her, and just that experience, she sort of connected it to her own family experience as well, I think. She managed to convince her family to let her go and study Nihonga, which is a Japanese-style painting in Kyoto. And then when she went back home, she continued to work, and then began to get exhibitions in Matsumoto and then in Tokyo.
Yeah, so she actually already had, recognition from seasoned artists from a pretty young age. In the 1950s, she's already had kind of critics recommending her work as superlative. And she is a supremely competitive artist, I think, even from a young age. And she took the initiative to research artists in America, and of course famously wrote a letter to Georgia O'Keeffe, seeking, advice from these artists. And, she was kind of nobody at the time, right? But she did get a response. And with their encouragement, she decided that, yeah, America's kind of the place to go. And it was also, at that time, I think, the peak of the art world, right? It was the center.
It really shifted from Paris
yeah.
to New York.
So she was very determined to make it. And when she arrived in New York, she vowed that she would be, at the top brass of the art world together with the big guys. So it was a very male-dominated art scene, as you can well imagine. It was very difficult for a woman to get a show anywhere. She would talk about this, kind of carting her paintings down the streets of Manhattan, and she's a tiny person and painting these huge paintings. At its largest, she's painted a 33-foot long canvas, right, which is almost like a wall. But it also led her into discovering that she was making environments, and this was also a precursor to her. If you can see like archival images, she's always photographed with her works in an environment surrounded by her objects and her paintings. Yeah.